Right, welcome to the show. You guys in Discord, you can unmute yourselves. Welcome, we're live now. Expect the regular internet interference. It's just like a ghost in the network or something. As soon as I press live, guaranteed internet connection problems. Very strange. Anyway, well, show everyone. Episode 48. It's Friday. It's our podcast. There's no Tom this week, so you get a week off. No, he was here last week.
Oh, was it? Not 2 weeks ago, though.
He got up. Yeah, he got up. He's been getting up. He's got no internet for this episode or something, so he'll be back next week. So with us this week, there's me. There's Harrison. Say hello.
Hello. Yeah, apologies if you can hear my dog barking. There's tons of fireworks right now, so that's not good.
I thought you said Tom's not on.
Tom's not on.
I was
Funny.
just kind of making a joke.
Funny.
What about his dog? It's not very nice, Sammy.
She is an ankle biter, to be fair.
Not very nice at all. Anyway, Sammy, you just introduce yourself. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be on once again.
Nice. And we've got Artsy Marxist with us as well. Say hello.
Hello, y'all.
Hello. Let's get you up on the screen so everyone can see. What are you painting this week?
A burning police car.
You're painting
Yep.
what?
A burning police car.
Oh, nice.
Not my usual subject matter, but I've wanted to for a long time, so yeah, that's what we're doing.
Nice. Yeah. I can see it in my head already. A Bob Ross burning police car.
Yep, that's exactly what's gonna happen.
Nice. Sammy, just before the show started, you were going on about how good your Yoda impression is, right?
No.
You were. Don't get all shy because
He's getting shy.
It was really good.
Not what I.
Huh?
Not what I.
Hold on. Do it now. So turn the music off.
I'm not going to do it again for you.
Yeah, I've turned the music down so people can hear it now. Go on, do it.
I'll turn it up. Whatever. It's already past. The moment's past.
Sammy, it's disappointing.
Past the moment. Past the moment has.
No, nice. It was just like Yoda
I've
was.
got the voice, but yeah.
It was just like Yoda was in the Discord with us, wasn't it? Right? Jesus Christ! Right. What are we going to talk about this week? Right. So I'm going to show off that image we did about the poor dog that got killed, and then CNN decided to turn it into a China bad story. So we're going to have a quick look at that. There's like I'm going to show the intro to this new 60 Minutes, the Australian. I don't want to call it news because it's not the Australian fantasy series, I guess. Just the intro to that is they just tell on themselves straight away. So I'm going to show you that. Sammy's going to talk about the so-called Middle East, right? We're going to talk a little bit about the farmers' protests in India, and also a little bit of China CPC stuff if we get time, I guess. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else got anything they want to add before we get into the show?
I might talk about I haven't really addressed this for quite a while, but I'm going to talk about the JCPOA or the quote-unquote nuclear deal as well, because it's going to resume, the talks are going to resume on the 29th of November.
All right. Okay. What were you going to say there, Harrison?
No, I wasn't going to say anything, don't worry.
All right. You were going to say...
football match tomorrow.
He was going to say, I've got nothing to say.
Sammy, don't bait me out.
Yeah, don't. Right, anyway.
Still a pandemic.
Anyway, let's get on with this first because I think this doesn't just apply to this story, right? This applies to like every piece of propaganda that gets put out. So it's kind of a sick story. So there was somebody was in quarantine in China, right? And the COVID staff who got sent. They got sent to they got sent to collect the person's stuff and look after their flat while they were in quarantine. And for some stupid reason, the people who went around thought that the the dog had been abandoned, or I don't know what they thought, but they thought this dog was to be due to put down, right? And they put it down, which is, you know, a sad story in itself. And it turns out that they got fired for it after the owner was like, oh right, yeah, that was my dog. They got fired for it and forced to apologise, right? End of story. Well, CNN decided that this was going to be like their headline story of the day, and had this reporter in Taiwan, which according to CNN is another country, right? So it's funny how Taiwan is conveniently China when China bad, right? But when they need to use it for an excuse for war, is not. But anyway, I digress. We put out this graphic because it just shows how quick they are to try and paint anything as like a reason for regime change, and that's the difference, isn't it, with Cold War propaganda? Similar to what was aimed against the USSR, right? It was always anything that went wrong in the USSR was always the fault of the state, never the individual. Whereas this is. Anyway, I'm going to read this out. Every nation has idiots, right, who abuse animals. It's got nothing to do with any political, economic system or it's not related to any ethnicity at all. CNN was twisting the story to smear the entire nation of China and to dehumanize Chinese people, basically, as if China deserves like this bullying from the US and interference in its affairs because of this one story of a dog like being killed by an idiot. You know, if that's not a case of manufactured consent, I don't know what is. There's no reason for this story to even be on American news, is there? Like, it's not any business of any American, nor does it concern any American. Does the American media put segments on when animals get abused in every country in the world? I mean, if that's the case, then cool, if that's your thing, but I don't think it is. I don't think the Western media runs a headline every time a dog gets kicked in Romania, right? I don't think they do at all. They're picking and choosing and to paint this as China bad, right? That's what it is. They
Absolutely.
Go on.
Yeah, they completely leave out the like tens of thousands of dogs and cats that get killed in the United States in high kill shelters, and all the accounts of animal abuse that happen here, because there's literally zero enforcement of like any sort of animal welfare laws basically all throughout the United States. So like the fact that they would go after China for something like that is pretty sad. Like literally kill shelters in the United States, they'll put down every dog in the entire shelter with zero remorse. Some of them are pets, even if it takes more than 5 days for the owner to find their dog. So you'd think if they really cared about the welfare of animals that they would start here in the United States and start going after, you know, police that don't apply any sort of welfare law for animals. But no, they don't. So,
and at the same time, they ran an article that we've not featured in this, but the article was like, is the Chinese state too overbearing? As if like it was authoritarian that these COVID medical staff had done this, as if like it was a state order, as if like it was due to overbearing state apparatus, you know, which doesn't care for the lives of cute dogs, right? As if like Xi Jinping had got up in the morning and banged his fist on the table and been like, execute the dog, right? Do you know what I mean? And it became like a state order. But like I said, you can see even in the screenshot of CNN there, it says underneath, government workers apologised and were removed from their positions. So you can see that the state is acted completely how it should. What more do you want? Like, you're not going to execute them over it, but you're going to sack them and make them apologise, right? At the very least.
No kidding.
And what you said is what we talked about in the second part. You know, it's projection. Police in the USA kill up to 10,000 dogs a year, right? That's 25 to 30 a day on average. The Department of Justice said that police shooting family dogs has become an epidemic. They used the word epidemic. What the US laws grant police immunity as well for killing family pets, so they can just get away with doing it. One policeman alone was recorded to having notched up over 26 dogs. Like, what's that about?
That's sick. What the fuck?
Yeah. There are entire cities just roaming with stray dogs that regularly attack people, and the city's response, instead of dealing with it, I lived in San Antonio, Texas, which is one of the cities that is like this. The response from the city is just to shoot the dogs. That's literally like the policy. They have no other plan other than just euthanizing. I mean, it's the level of projection is ridiculous. And then also the fact that they're like focused on this one dog instead of the 750,000 American humans that have died from COVID.
Exactly.
You know, also
exactly.
kind of weird. There's a trend in the United States of caring much more and like centering animals over the well-being of like black and brown people. It happens all the time here, so it really, really rings of that as well. You know?
Yeah. This is not just that. This is CNN putting dogs over all Americans, right? Because, like you say, COVID's killed Americans from across all American, societies and groups. So anyway, do you see the media from the rest of the world ever use these American examples? Like, I don't see France putting out stories for French people on, the French government should interfere in the US because the US police kill 10,000 dogs. No other media is doing this. Swap France for anyone. Even China's not doing this. Find me a story from a Chinese outlet that's about why the US state should be dismantled because US police kill. They just don't, because it's the business of Americans only, right? It's just bad journalism. It's not the business of any American, like Artsy just said then. The business of USA is to be like, well, why have you let nearly 1 million people of us die from COVID, right? Somebody replied to us earlier saying the pandemic ended in like May 2020. Duh. All right. You know what I mean? All right. You believe that. Anyway, these pictures at the bottom as well, we just added in. If the Chinese state is bad and should be destroyed because of the actions of one stupid individual, right, then what about these pictures? So we've got screenshots there from a couple of videos that have been leaked. US.
Is that the Marines where they throw the dog?
Yeah, that's the US in Afghanistan throwing dogs. And then I just put in some pictures of other US war crimes, because it only gets worse from that. If you think it's bad that they killed a dog, you should look at them treating Iraqis as if they are dogs, right? So the pictures from Abu Ghraib there and Vietnam. So I mean, if that's the case, though, if that's the standard, if the standard the Western media is setting is that if one dog dies in China, we should overthrow the Chinese state, then what about the 10,000 dogs that got killed in the USA? Surely that means we have to overthrow 10,000 US states, right? Like, what logic is this? Of course not. No, I don't think any other country around the world has any interest in overthrowing the US state. It's for Americans to do, right? It only works one way. It only seems to happen one way. That's what I should say, isn't it? It's kind of strange. Anyway, that's how the yarn is spun. Let me just show this. Go on.
I was going to say, because of the name of the episode, I checked what our China was saying about it, about this incident, and yeah, you can imagine the responses on there. They're acting like it's akin to Nazi Germany.
What, because a dog got killed? So this is the American subreddit for China, right?
Yeah, nutcases on there. But yeah, they're acting. You know what they're like on there.
Hold on,
what you'd imagine.
And I'm pretty sure Daniel Dumbrill's made videos about some of their heroes being wanted dog abusers as well in the US. Fled to China.
Probably.
I'm not going to go into that. I'm not interested in Reddit drama, but anyway, that's apparently, of course, right? Our China's going to be on that site. It doesn't matter what happens. They will. The Reddit brain epidemic, right, is strong, isn't it? The one that weirds me most out about Reddit is when you see those stories about Russia on on the world news subreddit that like any story about Russia has like if you haven't used Reddit, you can spend real money on giving a Reddit post like in a little award, like a medal. But any story about Russia will have like 200 awards on it, right? That means people have spent real money.
Thousands of pounds. Oh my god.
Thousands of pounds. So they've bought. So the person, just Reddit, just loving it, selling these stupid awards that people donate to propaganda about Russia. It's very strange. I understand the concept, right? It could work. There's nothing wrong with Reddit awards in practice, but the fact that people give awards to blatant CNN, Putin wants to eat your brain or whatever the story, it'll have like 600 awards on it. Like I say, people have spent thousands of pounds on it. Let's have a look at this before we get into Sammy's section. The title of this show is very fitting, I think, isn't it? It's exactly what they're doing. Poking the panda. That's exactly what they're doing. And they know it, right? I'm just going to play the first 40 seconds of this. I'm turning this music right. Before I start it, I just have to say everything about Australian TV is so cheesy, wild. Right? No, not wild. It's so cheesy. It's like watching American TV from like the 1980s. From just the delivery to like this guy's suit. It's like a cheap suit that he's got on. Like his mum's dressed him. Anyway, we'll play this. Listen to this.
The message coming out.
He tells on himself within the first 5 seconds. Listen.
The message coming out of China is getting louder by the day. It doesn't like other countries, especially Australia, ganging up and meddling in its affairs. As we know, Beijing is currently doing its best to punish us economically, but in the last few days, President Xi Jinping has also ratcheted up the rhetoric by warning of the perils of a new Cold War. A loose translation is, if we don't stop poking the panda, we'll face serious consequences. Now, it's worth taking that threat seriously because Xi controls the largest military. Face serious consequences. Now, it's worth taking that threat seriously because Xi controls the largest military force in the world, and as one of his supporters cautions tonight, the cost of conflict with China could be Armageddon.
Right, did you guys in Discord hear that? I've got a feeling you didn't.
I'm just watching on the YouTube, so I'm like 10 seconds behind.
Alright, cool. But, I mean, basically, he says China's told us to stop interfering in China, right? Especially us, Australia. So basically admits there that they've been meddling in another country. So not only does he admit it in the first 5 seconds, he then decides that China being like, can you stop that please, is like a threat. Well, what is this?
Yeah, it does. He says exactly that, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's a threat. Like, what are you talking about? What is it? How I don't understand how...
said, like, China's not going to let us bully them anymore. Basically.
I just don't understand how anybody can watch this and not just be like, oh yeah, I know who the bully is. What? This doesn't even work as propaganda, right? It's supposed to be subtle. You're not supposed to be
like, shouldn't work as propaganda, but it is Australia, so probably does.
But that's what I mean. They've even called the show Poking the Panda. Does that imply that you're... I mean, the thing about the US, right? Whenever the US has tried to start wars, the Gulf of Tonkin or Pearl Harbor or whatever, right? Real event or not, it's always been done on the defensive, right? You never want to start the war as the aggressor. And here they are being like, yeah, we're the aggressor. They've called the episode Poking the Panda and put an explosion onto Xi. Like, what are you doing? And then you're going to make out you're the victim. But I don't know. They're not even making out they're the victim. It's very strange, isn't it? I find it strange anyway. I saw that and was like, what? You just told on yourself in the first 5 seconds. Anybody who isn't suffering from the Reddit brain epidemic would see through that, hopefully.
Yeah,
I think before we go on to West Asia, we should just touch up on. I mean, we shouldn't go into the story because I think it's just like celebrity gossip, right? But this tennis player in China, right? Somebody's just shared that video of ours. I listened to 2 words and the fucking Australian accent is so insufferable. Anyway, there's this tennis player. There's a whole scandal going on in the Western media. People in China just don't care. But anyway, they've been claiming this tennis player's gone missing. So these pictures have come up of her in her house, and one of them is has got a picture of Winnie the Pooh in the background, which has caused all the Twitter users who suffer from the Reddit brain epidemic, right? They are all like going off as if it's a secret message.
Yeah, like more.
Do they think that she's disappeared or she's arrested or whatever because she has a picture of Winnie the Pooh in her house?
Yeah, they're saying it's like a cryptic message that she's been kidnapped.
Yeah, I mean, people. If you go onto the comment, just go into the comment section, right? I know it's bad advice. I'm sorry. I should never advise anyone to go into the comment section, but sometimes it's kind of cool. It's kind of good when you go in as a spectator, right? But anyway, there we go. Get this tweet up. This is the picture. Look. This is a China watcher. China has at times banned images of Winnie the Pooh, but for looking like Xi Jinping. So these government released images. She just posted. It says there on the side. Look, this is her WeChat moments. It's just like she posted them on Facebook or Twitter. There's the Chinese version of that. But look at this.
And they're saying it's government released images.
Yeah, exactly. That's Reddit. That's the Reddit brain for you, though. These government released images, because there can be no good in China ever, right? Everything is pre-planned by government. Anyway, these government released images of her are a distress signal, right? She's not put why, but why are they a distress signal? Well, it's because, of course, there's a picture of Winnie the Pooh, the favourite slogan of the Reddit user, right? It's there in the background. I would like to think that she knows that Americans are going wild for this, and she thought, if I put a picture of Winnie the Pooh in the background, I'll send all Americans ballistic. I mean, that would be me. I would do that, definitely. But apparently, Winnie the Pooh is banned unless you are a fugitive and you need to send a secret message. There you go, Winnie the Pooh in the background. Anyway, Sammy, that's enough of how the Western media talk crap. First article, this is the one in Arabic, so...
Yeah, this is actually a statement put out by the Iraqi resistance, or the group of the Iraqi resistance, concerning American withdrawal from Iraq. They start off with saying that they've allowed an opportunity for the Americans to withdraw by diplomatic means, as in, like, they're referring to the current ongoing negotiations.
As in, we'll let you go peacefully, right?
Yeah, basically. And this has been going on for almost a year now. And they continue on to say that basically they haven't seen any sign of effort from them, from the Americans in withdrawing, basically, and they've actually seen the contrary. They've seen statements by American army officials saying that they've increased their numbers or increased their equipment in Iraq, so on and so forth over the past year, and that they say, considering they're only 42, it's now 41 days away from the new year, the 31st of December, they're basically saying that they doubt the Americans are gonna be pulling out of Iraq within 42 days, basically, and that they say as soon as the clock hits midnight, night of the 31st of December, the coming 31st of December, the Iraqi resistance will carry out the mission to expel the American occupation by force, and they worded it in an interesting fashion. They say, with translation obviously, they will cut the cords of the occupation as soon as the clock hits midnight on the night of the 31st of December. In other words, I think they'll carry out similar attacks that have happened to the US occupation in Iraq, like something that pokes at the logistics here. In other words, like guerrilla warfare, pretty much. So they're saying that starting from the very beginning of next year, if the Americans aren't out, then they'll start military operations officially to expel the US occupation.
Mm-hmm. And why not, though, right? This is the media in the West will always play Iraq demanding something like that as if somehow Iraq's being like aggressive. They'll always be like, yeah, you know, Iraq's going to be aggressive to us if we don't get out. Well, yeah, it's their country.
Yeah.
You get the fuck out. Like,
bearing in mind last year, the Iraqi parliament, after a 1 million man march demanding the expulsion of American forces, the Iraqi parliament voted unanimously for the Americans to leave. And I think that's what initiated the quote-unquote strategic talks that, as we see, haven't really bared any fruit.
it's been going... I mean, the Iraq war's kind of become forgotten about, hasn't it? In a way. As much as... well, I'd say more so than Afghanistan has. People forget this.
Yeah, I mean, talk of the war in Iraq really has been sidelined, I think. But I also think this... this comes in the context of really the drawback of the US that has been going on, not just in this region, but like in Afghanistan as well, that we really are witnessing an empire in decline here, especially considering their strategic reorientation to focus on the East, like the Far East, China and such.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, speaking about the Axis of Resistance, we have more news on Yemen.
This is the next one.
Yeah, so the 15th of November, about 4 days ago, yes, more advances were made on the three fronts of the southwestern and southern front, basically. More prominent tribe members or tribes have defected from the Saudi puppets to the Ansar Allah movement, the Yemeni resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the liberation of Maghreb is just a matter of time now, probably a matter of days, I would say.
Wow.
Considering the Saudis even withdrew from the western coast, the Hodeidah area, also from Aden they've withdrawn, which is technically the second most important capital. It's historically the second capital of Yemen, basically, back when there was the north-south divide.
What do you think?
So really,
what do you think? What do you think that? What do you think the Saudi-led coalition? You say that the US is an empire in decline, right? And if that's true, then surely that means that the Saudi-led coalition doesn't want this war to continue, right?
They're kind of trapped, because if they stop the war, then that's like an outright admission of defeat. Plus, it's a recognition that Ansar Allah is now the official, legitimate representative of the Yemeni people. Being a national liberation movement in its side, like Saudi Arabia, that's not exactly imperialist
But
interests.
what I'm saying is, we're seeing like we're seeing a shift, aren't we, in the region geopolitically? We're seeing old enemies become allies again, and we're seeing not allies, but we're seeing diplomatic methods being utilised again, because
because they're being pushed into a corner.
Yeah, exactly. Pushed into a corner, and existence is better than not existing, right? So these states that have relied on the empire have now got to quickly consolidate their own existence, haven't they? Knowing that, you say, the resistance is strong and stuff. So what I'm getting at is, once the US is out of Iraq, once the US is out of Syria, once the Yemen war starts, is Saudi Arabia going to want to be there still? I don't think they are they? Because they're going to have to be. They don't want to be the aggressor in the region when the region is united, right? Because that's only they're going to be next then, right?
Indeed, and that's one of the things of being dragged in, or pushed into a corner. One of their reactions, or one of the earliest reactions we saw of being dragged into a corner, was their reaction to the previous statements made by the now Lebanese Minister of Information, George Khaldahi, where they absolutely lashed out at Lebanon diplomatically by cutting diplomatic ties, cutting off trade, banning imports from Lebanon, banning exports to Lebanon, in an effort to really make the Lebanese economy suffer, and therefore try to destabilize the popular base of the resistance there, which is actually a part of an Israeli strategy that was published in 2007 in the NSR something, basically the national security think tank of the Zionist entity.
Right. Okay, carry on with this article.
Yeah. So another reaction to, in an attempt to bear its claws, due to being pushed into a corner, Saudi Arabia has really ramped up airstrikes in Yemen, especially yesterday. More on that later, and the promises of retaliation. But basically, the take from this is Ma'rib is only a matter of time, and from there, pretty much the entirety of Yemen will be. Also, not only that, but if you look at the article afterwards, we saw over the past few months Israeli.
Hold on, there's some good footage on at the minute. That's all.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just letting this video play in there of resistance.
Yeah, and we also
a lot of this fighting in Yemen is small scale battles, right?
Most of them
with
are
airstrikes and such as support. The classic, imperialist Middle East war. Again, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. It's mostly guerrilla war carried out by
from both sides.
Yeah, both sides, but obviously the other side has
an infinite budget. Yeah, exactly, and air support of US cruise missiles or whatever they require.
Definitely, yeah. Very, very reminiscent.
You broke up a little bit there then. Very reminiscent of what?
I said quite reminiscent of Vietnam, especially when you see the pictures of the Yemeni fighters who don't even have shoes to wear.
Yeah. Right, anyway, let's get into this next article up.
Yeah, moving slightly on, but remaining on the subject or the topic. Over the past few months, we've seen several, including the Zionist army, express their concern as to the developments in Yemen, especially the Ma'rib liberation, as it really undermines their influence or their hegemony at sea, which obviously is quite a choke point for their geographical location, which I think explains why they have been demonetized with Morocco, especially overtly over the past few weeks, and I think they're due this week to fly off to Morocco to sign a defense agreement or something. They've also been hosting Israeli submarines. Which is probably why Algeria, on the other hand, has been hosting the Iranian foreign minister and searching how to ties with Iran as well. So there's a good development of Algeria. So, yeah, I mean, and on top of that, like, the Yemeni resistance is part of the Axis resistance, therefore it will really consolidate itself, and the Zionist entity threaten north, east, and south now, especially considering how the Yemenis have home-developed their ballistic missile technology, and they have demonstrated so by targeting very critical infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, even Aramco oil facilities. May I mention as well, all of that has been in retaliation to Saudi Yemeni civilians. And it is obviously their natural right to retaliate. Now, this tweet that you see was published yesterday. This Major Yahya, spokesperson of the Yemeni armed forces, who are like allies of the Ansarullah, the Yemeni Popular Committees, or the Yemeni Soviets. Saudi American aggression forces have carried out in the past 24 hours more than 60 spread to a number of governorates of the Republic.
You're breaking up a little
He
bit,
promises that this escalation will have serious consequences to the forces of aggression, mainly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and they must bear the consequences. So within the next week, maybe I would say they are preparing for a wide retaliation, and I think they're going to go for this again, which probably won't set the oil prices to go haywire, because they haven't really in the past, but it will be really interesting to witness what will happen afterwards.
And what about what do you know anything about like the Western liberal take on this war? I know you see adverts on television, you know, donate to aid for the war in Yemen, and it is framed as if they are fighting a defensive war, right? So, but you just never hear of it in the West at the same time. It's quite strange.
Yeah, especially if you look at that Vice, not just that, but like obviously other media outlets, or generally the Western liberal perspective on the war in Yemen, or the way they frame it. They frame it in a way such as that the people of Yemen are suffering because of a war that's being fought between two sides which are both idiots, both are reactionary, and they have this very oriental view of Arab fighting, and therefore people are suffering because of that. Zero mention of the Saudis at the whims of the US and Israel, obviously, for imperialist interests. They try to impose their puppet in Yemen, especially after the 2015 revolution that overthrew the dictatorship. By the way, just to give some context to that, the dictatorship that was overthrown as part of as a spillover from the Arab Spring. I say a spillover because it wasn't spring. The Arab Spring was an imperialist program of regime change for imperialist interests. However, in the case of Yemen, that was a spillover because the regime that was in Yemen beforehand was actually a result of the quote-unquote reunification between the North Arab Republic of Yemen and the Southern Communist Yemen, or Democratic Yemen. A few years after that, a civil war ensued because they were heavily suppressing the communists from their rightful positions in the government. And yeah, ever since then, they've basically been Saudi and therefore US puppet states. Even like some leaked documents show that they have been having talks with the Zionists since 2004, so you have that as well. So along comes 2015, the successor to that dictatorship, Hadi, who was the Saudi puppet basically, was prevented from assuming leadership of the country. He now resides basically in a hotel in Saudi Arabia. The joke that, the guy's a president from a hotel in a foreign country. But moving on. This war has been going on to basically starve Yemen of its fighting capabilities, of its capabilities for national liberation and self-determination. Its self-determination will, of course, be part of the self-determination of the entire country. Threat to the Gulf monarchies, especially. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I talked too quickly or something.
Yeah, I mean, to make matters worse, you broke up. So you're going to have to say it again
when did I
anyway.
break up from?
About the last sentence or something.
Yeah, basically, I said that they've been trying to suppress the national liberation and self-determination of Yemen, which is a part of the self-determination of the people's entire region and the surrounding region, of course, which obviously poses a threat to imperialist interests and their tools, such as the Gulf monarchies, such as Saudi Arabia and stuff.
Right. Okay. Let's move on.
So, yeah.
Next article.
Oh yeah, this is the article I was kind of talking about just now, actually. But yeah, it seems like the Yemeni intelligence services have uncovered some heightened Israeli activity. They say that they will reveal more details with time. So I think in future episodes I'll have a deeper look at it.
Mm-hmm.
But it also explains like how Israel has been concerned with what's taking place in Yemen.
So what's going to happen once Matreb, is it? What's the next step after that? You know,
Matreb will be the south of Yemen, the south coast, I think, which is mainly has Emirati influence, but obviously, especially after the forces were withdrawn from Aden, which is kind of like the southern capital. I think the southern region will be liberated in no time, probably before the end of January.
right, but then what's next for that? How long left on this war? That's what I'm getting at.
Well, let's say a few days for Matreb. I would give it maybe a month to 2 months, because I think this does to a degree coincide with the JCP talks.
So again, it coincides with what?
It coincides with Iran nuclear deal talks, which start again on the 29th.
Okay, and why would that be? Is the next article on this?
No, actually,
Okay,
I don't really have an article. I just have some brainstorming moments about this and some thoughts about this. Now, basically, the JCPOA, the talks, or the Vienna talks, will be resumed on the 29th of November. Iran has a very solid position of wanting all sanctions to be lifted. And the Americans aren't really fans of it, nor are the Europeans, to note. The Israelis definitely aren't fans of having a nuclear deal at all. Nor are the Saudis, actually, to point that out. And I think that this deal, not only on the surface, as it appears, like lifting sanctions, making life easier for everyone as well, to make it easier for them to develop and regain their strength.
Yeah, is it? That's what I'm thinking. It's not just about nuclear capability, is it? It's about, like you say, it's the lifting of sanctions, isn't it? Because
it's also about the lifting of sanctions. It's about also the releasing of financial assets, which are estimated at the hundreds of billions from places like South Korea and other places in Europe.
Mm-hmm. But it's not just that, right? It's more of if you can get one sanction lifted, it's not long till all sanctions are lifted, right?
It's not just that. I believe it also has a geopolitical aspect, because I think that if the Americans are forced into a corner in the talks with Iran, then this has kind of like a ripple effect in the region.
Yeah.
The Saudis won't exactly have as much say in the topic or even space to act against Iran, nor will the Israelis, in fact.
If the imperial core looks weak, then its vassals can't do shit, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think if Iran comes off on a strong foot with the nuclear talk, which I think it will, I think the resistance, especially in Yemen, will be a lot bolder.
And even, am I right in saying
Because
that?
because Saudi Arabia and like the Emirates and the Israelis will be very restricted,
Right.
because I think the Americans really want to shift their energy and focus from the Middle East onto China, and they kind of want to calm things down a little bit, or not calm things down a little bit in this. Have kind of like the lesser of two bad
It's less.
options.
Well, in terms of the US military, it is less expensive in terms of having to fight and lose lives and all kinds of stuff, and it's less expensive propaganda-wise, isn't it, to switch to China, because China's invisible. It's a lot better to be in a Cold War than it is a hot war, right? In terms of keeping it going. The Cold War went on for 40 years because the US could always blame everything on Russia. It was Escher says it in her show. She calls them the invisible Russians, because the Americans would claim all this stuff, but then you would never see any Russian troops. Like, just shows a picture of a Russian troop, defending Cuba from, you don't see it. It's always a story, and it's the same with current Cold War. It's the same with current Cold War propaganda as well, isn't it? Because they can pretty much. It's better to be able to just print, a Chinese dog got killed, so therefore we should overthrow the Chinese state, rather than having to pay the bill for the occupation of Afghanistan. And in terms of money, the money bill and the, it turns into bad propaganda after a while, doesn't it? Governments get elected and fall on being in war. So if they can have it as a Cold War, it's a lot better, isn't it? I think that's why the US is doing this switch, because if they can pull out of the Middle East quietly, and nobody in the rest of the Western world sort of hold them to account for it, they can focus on China, and they can write military contracts with countries like Australia for an invisible enemy. It's good, isn't it? I mean, it's the same as the USSR. The USSR was a good money spinner, because just like in Doctor Strangelove, isn't it? You just go, well, if we don't develop, we're going to end up with a gap. We'll end up with a nuclear bomb gap or whatever. So there's almost unlimited budget for the military complex in a Cold War. But in a hot war, there's not, because the war can only last until the public decides it's not going to last any longer. And if that goes on too long, you end up like the Tsar did in Russia, right? Or the US government did in Vietnam, which is you get chased out whilst you've got protests at home against it. So I think that's why we're seeing this shift away from the so-called Middle East, right? Because the US gets bogged down there. It's 20 years and nothing changes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with I agree with where you're going with this, because we've seen that the Americans, especially over the past 2 years, they've kind of been like dampening their presence or their effect in the Middle East, let's say, because a few months ago we've seen that they've withdrawn all of their forces in their bases in Qatar, and they've moved them all to Jordan. And I think that's because they've kind of lost hope in trying to defend, or in the prospects of trying to defend like places like Qatar or something in an event of a war with Iran.
Exactly.
Iran has a war with Israelis, so that's probably their positioning in Jordan, which is just to the east of the Zionist entity. Probably saves them a lot of effort and money in terms of like military operations if it were to happen.
Well, of course it does. It's cheaper. It's cheaper to have the media print a story that like nobody can verify about, China flying into an invisible bit of airspace. So therefore, we've got to sell more tanks to Taiwan Island or whatever, right? Than it is to, occupy, run, supply. Have to deal with the public in that country as well. There's plenty of like Vice documentaries about the US and Afghanistan where you're seeing US troops who are there not want to be there, right? So they can only stay there until troops decide enough's enough, and when enough is enough happens, you get what happened to the SAR. So they've got to wade this fine line, haven't they? And it's definitely. I don't see a hot war with China happening, because just like that 60 Mins intro, they know that they can't beat China. It's the biggest standing army in the world, right? And they've got allies like Russia and Iran, these other countries that are well prepared to defend themselves if they get attacked. It's all hype, isn't it, to be able to keep signing military contracts? So I think that's why you're seeing this very swift exit from the so-called Middle East.
And also, recently Iran had exercises where they held exercises not only in the sea, but also exercises on terrain that was very similar to terrain in Syria and Palestine and Jordan. It's kind of funny because they were also Israeli flags as target practice for their artillery and airstrikes. However, I do believe, especially because of the nature of terrain they were performing these exercises in, that's kind of a signal, or not a signal, but a sign towards or signifying that if the axis of resistance is properly solidified within the region, especially in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, then there will be direct confrontation with the Zionist entity, Syrian resistance, Lebanese resistance, alongside the Iranian army.
Mm-hmm. And they don't want that, because I think that the empire knows that it will not get the allies that it expects, or that it's sold to the world that it's going to get. I mean, you just look at things in the UN where they vote against fascism being normalised, and there's only ever like 2 countries or 3 countries that say no, and it's always like USA, Zionist entity, Ukraine. Vote to end the embargo on Cuba. Even the UK is voting to drop the fucking embargo on. No, they're not even abstaining. They're voting for it, right? They're voting for it. I think most of the world is trying to stop that embargo on Cuba, because Also, yeah, just to add a little detail, is that when the Iranian men are doing their marches and exercise and stuff, they always chant onwards to Jerusalem and we will liberate Jerusalem and such. So that's a bit spicy. Jamie's in the chat there raises a good point. I think I want to try and answer. He says, I found my thoughts turning back to hypothetical China victorious post-World War III scenario. Could the victorious alliance demand NATO be forcibly disbanded? Well, I think if there was a situation where a war was won by an anti-NATO alliance, that would happen anyway, right? I think that would probably just happen naturally. But I think at the same time, I think that is happening naturally now in the world, and I think it fits in with what Sammy's been talking about, because the Middle East, the US occupation of the Middle East is a miniature version of NATO in a way. It's the coalition, isn't it? The US coalition.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how they were framing it a few months or a couple of years ago. Like the Middle Eastern NATO, they were formed.
Yeah, and that's just collapsing on its own accord, because it's just not just people don't want to live under military industrial complex profit making exercise. They just don't. So it's not the quickest way for imperialism or capitalism to undo itself is to treat its occupied subjects like shit, right? That's how the British get kicked out of India, right? Or wherever Haitian slaves rise up because they're treated so bad. Like people get to a point where they're like, well, I've got nothing to lose now, so I'm going to turn on you. And more countries do it. Why should Iran or whatever country that's living under US sanction stick by them? Would you North Korea gets supplied by Chinese ships in the sea. for oil, which is like under sanction, and the US will be like, oh, this is illegal oil running, and it's like, well, it's not really, is it? It's just two countries doing business with each other. And I mean, the fact that they're doing it out at sea to try and stop the sanctions getting any worse for North Korea is kind of good, isn't it, in a way? But still, who is a country thousands of miles away to say that a country that borders with another can't just do business with each other in whatever product it wants to? It's just ridiculous, isn't it? And it's coming unstuck faster and faster.
Some very wholesome news that I remember from back, and I think you will as well, because we brought it up on the podcast, was that Iran was sending oil, not only oil, so the facilities to process the extracted oil to Venezuela, and which have really, according to Telesur, I believe it was, the Venezuelan media, that it really did give Venezuela a space to breathe in front of the sanctions. And not only that, they also sent, the Iranians also sent gunboats to Venezuela, like to prop up their maritime security.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm sure I remember at the time of the very what was it, 2017, 18, 16, around when the US with the attempt on Maduro, right? And I'm pretty sure Russia sent like a couple of helicopters over just to be like, look, you come and bully Venezuela, you'll start World War III, because you're going to have to kill some Russians if you want to do it. Go ahead. And then that just falls down, doesn't it, instantly, because it's that simple. Like Iran running ships to Venezuela, that it's just confident, isn't it? They're like, we know the US isn't going to sink, because that would be aggressive, right? The US can only start World War III as it has to be the defender, doesn't it? I think it's shown itself throughout history. It doesn't want to start a war as the aggressor, because that means that the American public are not in favour of it. Vietnam, they started on a lie of Vietnamese aggression, right? The Gulf of Tonkin incident, and the public support gets lost for that war when the US public find out just what the US is doing in Vietnam, right? Isn't it? The moment they find out, oh, it's just killing fields, that's when the public don't want it anymore. They got to withdraw as quick as they can, because now this existence of the US is a threat, isn't it? So
yeah,
it's the same old story. Go on.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, I remember, I don't know if it's happened, Joe, or it's happening soon, but Iran and Venezuela are signing a 20-year cooperation accord. I'll try and find it. I remember reading about it a couple months ago.
Well, there's sanctions on Venezuela, right? From the US.
But I remember, so here we are. So Iran will sign a 20-year cooperation accord with Venezuela when Nicolas Maduro visits Iran in the next few months, and that was in October. That's just kind of literally about beating the sanctions from both sides. So there you go as well.
Yeah, and also the US will make up stories about Venezuelan supermarkets are empty, etc. And then Iran will build a supermarket in Venezuela that sells like Iranian products. So, because they don't give a shit about the sanctions, they're just like, yeah, shit. We'll just sell our products and you sanction us. This is a thing with sanctions, right? And
very wholesome.
Well, you bully a people so much, they will just turn around and make it themselves, won't they? It's the same with the DPRK, and it's the same with Iran. But they will build supermarkets in Venezuela, and then somehow it's flipped over to now Venezuela's double bad now, because not only were people starving, because obviously the supermarkets now, so people can't be starving, right? Surely, who's the enemy now? So Iran's bad because supermarkets got built. Is that the kind of straw that you're going to grasp at? It's beyond words, isn't it? That like they can do this, and it will steer the path of human history. This isn't just somebody like standing on the end of the road shouting. I mean, it kind of is, isn't it? Because it doesn't really affect anything. The Western media can cry all they want. Iran is shipping oil to Venezuela, and they're not going to let like some American liberal who calls everybody a sadist like stop that from happening. Oh, you call me a sadist, we best turn the boat round. Do you know what I mean? You got us. It's not going to happen, is it? It's not. You're seeing these manufactured protests in Cuba that don't even happen. So the US holding press conferences and being like, yeah, there's going to be these protests in Cuba that we've started.
Yeah,
and then nothing happens. Go on, Harrison.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, yeah.
What were you saying?
I just wanted to say that pretty much is all I have to say about my part for this episode.
Well, yeah. Do you like how I'm calling it the so-called Middle East, by the way? I think we've got to change that.
Yeah, I actually think that's quite an important point to stress, because first of all, like, the Middle East was coined by Britain about 150 years ago, and it kind of like strips the region of its personality and its identity. Even interesting, I actually read about this in a book about Chinese and Arab relations. In the 1950s, when the revolutionary press was kind of like starting its relations with other places of the world, they had an internal debate in China of whether to call it West Asia or the Middle East, because the Middle East was coined by the imperialists for this reason, or imposed this naming on the region, and pretty much their reasoning to continue using the Middle East was because the people of the region back then just like went on with it and started using it as well, when it was like the reactionary governments back then.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of that's an example of soft power, isn't it? How
exactly, yeah, and it's still used to this day by like most people, unfortunately. The Middle East instead of like West Asia or the Arab world is still used commonly, but like the term the Middle East
again, Arab world though. Arab world's not very helpful because not everybody there is an Arab, right? For a start off. Exactly,
yeah.
And not only that, it makes it sound it's Orientalist, isn't it? Just like Middle East is Orientalist. It make Westerners think of like Disney film Aladdin, don't they? When they think of the Middle East, it's just it's a stereotype. But like I say, West Asia. You're gonna write like this article, aren't you? On like a little entry level to each region and what the sort of anti-imperialist position on those places is, or who is fighting against it. Maybe not what the anti-imperialist position is, but who's fighting for self-determination in the area, I guess. Yes. Anyway, what we're going to talk about next, Harrison, you've got some articles on the farmers' protests, right? What's the news on that?
Yeah, so I sent you a couple, and yeah, basically good news there. So obviously the farmers' protests have been going on for over a year now, as far as I know.
We covered them ages ago with Matrey quite in depth at the time. They just started, I think, when we
we had the podcast, didn't we? Basically, in short, the three laws were essentially just deregulating the farming industry in India, and bypassing kind of the governmental agricultural board, basically, which was there to ensure that farmers are safeguarded from exploitation from larger retailers. So basically, these laws were giving power to the big kind of monopolising industries.
I remember the way Maitreya explained it was that farmers in India will have their farm, right, and they will have their own warehouse on their property that can fit a certain amount of their produce in there, right? And then that gets sold to, like you said, then one of these big capitalist food companies up the chain. And the way that the law in India works at the minute is that, what was it, that the quota for how much a farmer can store or something was favouring the farms. Therefore, they had the buying or selling power of that product, right? Because they could dictate the flow to the market. But the way that this law worked was that it stops that and gave the power of all that to the capitalists that were further up the chain, right? I believe that's what was the crux of the protests anyway. I could be simplifying it quite a lot, but anyway, you carry on.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I'm not 100% sure on kind of the intricacies.
It was definitely one of the policies anyway.
Yeah, but kind of what you see from kind of industries that are taken over by capitalists in regards to deregulation and things like that, just stripping away the rights of the people in favour of the big kind of industry monopolies and things like that. But obviously a year of probably the biggest strikes and protests that we've seen in a long time worldwide.
The biggest in the world, wasn't it?
Yeah, for a long time. Obviously COVID has played a part as well in regards to the protests, and yeah, there's been a lot of stop starting, but it has been consistent for basically a year now.
People have died in this, haven't they?
Yes, so 750 farmers have actually died, or 700 or something. Farmers have died, and as the Communist parties in India describe them as martyrs now, basically for this struggle. But good news is that the three laws that were being proposed and kind of being signed into law have been repealed entirely. So initially Modi, obviously the Prime Minister of India, said he'd put them kind of on the back burner, but obviously that wasn't good enough for the protests, which then carried on. They were demanding kind of them to be scrapped entirely, which has now happened. But as the article on screen kind of says, which was written by someone in the Communist Party of India, basically Modi has not been gracious in defeat. He didn't kind of express a word of regret for the 700 martyred in the struggle, and there was no assurance that all false cases against the farmers would kind of be drawn and done away with. There was no apology for the harsh words used against the farmers in the course of this year. They were abused as terrorists, traitors, disgundas, which I'm not sure what that word actually means, but I'm assuming it's obviously in an Indian context. Disruptors, liars and cheats by the leaders of his party. One of them is still in the central cabinet, who is complicit in the horrific happenings in, I don't know how to say that. Yeah, which is one of the main sources of violence between kind of protesters and the government. So yeah, it's a big win, I guess, for the working class of India, and kind of very inspiring for the numerous protests which are currently ongoing around the world. Shall we carry on? Yeah.
Do you want me to carry on reading it?
Yeah, why not? I can't. I've lost where we are in the article now.
You can read the next paragraph. The Prime Minister also scored a self-goal when he defended the laws, saying that he was sorry he had failed to convince some of the farmers. The question arises, if the laws are good, if only some of the farmers have opposed them, then why withdraw the laws? He doesn't need a political scientist to fathom the reason. The huge political fallout of the continuing Kisan struggle on the forthcoming elections, particularly in Uttar Pradesh and the Punjab region, the epicenters of the struggle, the message in the PM's defence of the laws, even while withdrawing them, was heard loud and clear by the farmers. Given an opportunity, the government will push for laws again, more so if they win state elections. Right? Already the main contender against the BJP for power in UP, the Samajwadi Party, has coined the slogan I'm not going to read that in Hindi, but I'm going to read the English. Their intentions are not honourable. They will reinstate the law after the elections. I mean, it's classic. Any Westerner should understand that slogan, right? Does that happen all the time in the West? Americans are still waiting for their COVID payment. It's just a case of that. Sammy, what are you doing? The statement from Samyukta Kisan Morcha indicates that they are not withdrawing their struggle until the most important issue they have been raising, which was a legal guarantee for minimum support prices, is addressed by the government. That was what I was talking about earlier on. Other issues have been flagged by the leaders of the Kisans, many of whom have expressed scepticism about the announcement. The distrust of the government runs quite high, so if the BJP thought it could remove the Kisan agenda from the electoral battle by this move, they may be in for an unpleasant surprise.
Want me to carry on?
Yeah, sure, carry on.
There was another more cynical reason for the BJP move. In UP, particularly Western UP, communal riots just before the last Assembly election paid the BJP rich electoral dividends. Since the countdown began to the elections this time, the BJP is in mission mode to create communal disharmony using an arsenal containing communally toxic slogans, campaigns targeting minorities on so-called love jihad, violent anti-cow slaughter campaigns, and giving licence to the police to arrest young Muslims at will. The response to the communal campaign has been tepid. The unity of the Kisans across religious communities and castes has acted as a barrier to the default electoral strategy of the BJP. The BJP hopes that by accepting the Kisan demands for now, they can get the issue out of the way and have a better chance at pushing their own divisive agenda. It would be good for India if the government learnt the lessons the Kisans have taught it. So lesson number 1, bulldozing parliamentary procedures using the strength of a brute majority can be costly. If the government had sent the bills to the standing committee, if it had given the farmers the opportunity to be heard, if it had allowed fair voting procedures, this situation would not have arisen. The bills in their present form would not have become laws. So that's essentially saying to be a democracy, right? And listen to what the people actually want. Lesson number 2, disregard and contempt for dissenting voices is counterproductive. From the very beginning, this government used all its power to defame farmers, just as advocates of justice for Adivasis and Dalits and minorities have been branded urban Naxals and imprisoned. Farmer leaders were branded as anti-nationals. In this case, the strength of the farmers' united movements put the government on the defensive with the struggle organically, transforming into a mass struggle against the BJP and its governments at the centre and states. And then the last one, lesson number 3, which needs no explanation. India's labouring classes, the Kisans and the workers, have shown by their courage that dictatorship does not work and dictatorship can be defeated. So yeah, quite a powerful message there as well at the end.
The victory of the Kisan movement has wider implications and will bring confidence to all those on the side of justice and the values of democracy and secularism enshrined in our constitution. That was Brinda Karat, a Politburo member of the CPIM, which is the Communist Party of India, Marxists, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Reading this, it's good that they've won in India, right? But it also, there's a lesson, isn't there, for anybody who lives in a bourgeois democracy, isn't there, here? Because this is a victory for a workers' movement, a mass movement that had mass support, like lesson number 2 there, in that, what they've said BJP have to learn. The more that you push people, the more people stand on the side of the workers, and it becomes, the more you try to suppress it, the more it becomes a mass movement, and then all of a sudden it's organically transformed into a mass struggle, not only against these 3 laws but against BJP in general, because they backed themselves into a corner. So Western people living in the West should be able to take from that general strike works, doesn't it? Mass organisation and union. It's the unions. I mean, I remember one thing that Matrey spoke about on the episode on the farmers' protest that he did with us was that it was being led at the front by unions with the Communist Party, right? A left coalition at the front, and they have the strength to beat the biggest political party in the world, the BJP. It's bigger than the Chinese Communist Party, right? In terms of membership.
Yeah.
And they can have them. I mean, there's something very similar in this story to struggles that have happened in Britain, right? When you've got the miners beating the Conservative government in the 1970s by literally just refusing to mine the coal and having
with a 3-day week, wasn't it?
Yeah, blackouts, etc. Because they just were like, right, if you're not going to listen to us, we ain't going to work. This is pretty much the same.
The poll tax as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the 90s.
I mean, poll tax kind of got snuck in as council tax.
Yeah, backdoor, didn't it?
Still.
Yeah, we should learn a lesson from that, right? Because what did we do after that? We voted in John Major. Weren't really going to do anything different.
Sure, but I think there is a big lesson. There's a big, piece of writing on the wall, isn't there? Which, this struggle was led by a communist movement. And the struggle in the Middle East isn't necessarily led by communists, but it's of similar vein, right? It has mass support. I think the key is that it becomes a mass struggle. It's something Mao spoke about, isn't it? And it's in China, it's the same, isn't it? That when you see those rallies that the Communist Party were having during the revolution, and you're like, yeah, that's definitely a mass movement. Unlike these colour revolution attempts where it's 10 fighters posing, trying to get the best shots of them so you can make out, or take the photo from an angle where it looks like there's more people than there were, or latch onto another movement, etc. These really are mass movements, and they can win. And communists can still make wins. They can still make anti-imperialist struggle. I mean, this in India is an anti-imperialist struggle because what the capitalist companies above the farmers are not necessarily Indian, are they? They could be national corporations. They're probably owned by Nestle at the very
Nestle,
top.
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I remember on the podcast, Matrey was on about the vanilla farmers, right, in India at the start, where they basically grew all that vanilla for those huge companies such as Nestle, and then when the crops were done, they basically pulled out of the deal and bought from Mexico and other countries instead, and basically the farmers all went bankrupt. So they have the history to back up this struggle as well. So,
and don't forget the key in that is that, like, on the lowest level, under communism, global communism, right? There would be no Indians growing vanilla for Nestle in the USA because they would just grow in food there instead. It's like this. It's the same story of the British Empire, right? When the British Empire turned up to this Indian tribe that's lived there for however long, and have their own self-sustaining, their food secure, right? Self-determined history. They can feed themselves. They can defend themselves. They're the masters of their own destiny. The British come in and go, right, you see that land that you've been growing food to feed yourselves on? No, now you're going to grow our cash crop on it, tea, opium, whatever, right? And then they turn the ground sour so it can't grow vegetables anymore and move on somewhere else. That's imperialism on its lowest level, on the lowest bottom rung, right? And that's what this is. This is the same, but this is in 2021, not 1821, right? It's exactly the same. We've got to make that comparison in history. We can't pretend that the actions of the British Empire are any less relevant to the actions of Shell or whoever, right? Mm-hmm. You've only got to go on Wiki. I mean, it's almost like a liberal talking point that they'll go, oh, these are the companies that were involved in the slave trade that are still around. But the only difference with the liberal approach to that is these companies can somehow apologise their way out of it, can't they? And just go, oh, I'm sorry, guys. You know, it's 2021 now. We're really sorry we were involved in the slave trade only 100 years before. But, you know, there we go. Glory to the farmers, right? There's another thing that you sent. What's this?
Oh, that's just a tweet from the CPIM. Just basically what we've spoke about already, really.
Let me get this graphic up. Central government buckles before working class might. Yeah, exactly. The farmers' fortitude has won over government and corporate vested interests. This win directs Indian politics to growing working class unity. Oppression will always lead to struggle. CPIM Kerala salutes the martyrs and the protesters. Now, I mean, just imagine a world where the empire has withdrawn from the Middle East. Imagine a world where India has turned socialist. It'd be the end, wouldn't it, for imperialism?
Yeah, it was most of the world's population.
Exactly. Well, most of the world's population is located with India and China, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Feel like a little circle on the globe and fit like most of the world's population. Anyway, let's have a look at this before we've got like half an hour left. Sammy, I know
this is long, by the way.
It's all right. This will do us out till the end of the show. Sammy's trying to get off so he can go out clubbing because it's Friday night. Yeah, I'll shame you on air. Right. So this week, you might have seen the Western media going on about this as if like, what's the story? How's the Western media spinning this? They're being like, oh, she's dictator for life and he's
more of a dictator than Mao.
Yeah,
or the same level.
He's now more of a dictator than Mao because kids have been told that they've got to write I love Xi Jinping 10 times a day at this new CPC brainwashing. The old story, right? Anyway, Beijing, November 16th, an explanatory address delivered by Xi Jinping on a landmark resolution on the major achievements of the historical experience of the Communist Party of China. I said this on other episodes. I think what scares the West are these really long names that.
Yeah, imagine Biden trying to remember those names.
Exactly. Biden's got to talk about the historical experience of the landmark resolution on the major achievements of the historical experience of the Communist Party. He's got to say that without pissing himself. It's hard enough for him to not do that. Anyway,
I think you might as well just scroll down to Xi's speech, which is a little lower. That's just kind of introducing the speech.
Right. Okay. Blah blah blah.
There you go.
On behalf of the Political Bureau of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, I now brief you on the resolution of the CPC Central Committee on the major achievements and the historical experience of the party over the past century and related issues. Our party has always attached great importance to reviewing its historical experience. As early as the Yan'an period, Comrade Mao Zedong pointed out, we will not be able to achieve greater success unless we have a clear understanding of our history and of the roads we have travelled. In 1945, at the critical juncture for securing final victory in the war of resistance against the Japanese aggression, the 6th CPC Central Committee convened its 7th plenary session and adopted the resolution on certain questions in the history of our party. The resolution reviewed the history of the party and the experience it had gained and lessons it had learned since its founding in 1921, especially those in the period between the 4th plenary session of the 6th Central Committee in January 31 and the Zunyi meeting in January 35. It drew conclusions on major historical issues of the party, leading to broad consensus amongst all party members, particularly high-ranking officials, on fundamental questions pertaining to the Chinese Revolution. It served to strengthen the solidarity of the party, paved the way for the convocation of the 7th CPC National Congress, and helped advance the Chinese Revolution significantly. When our country go on.
No, I was going to say I can carry on and just you carry on, and I'm opening up the document on mine.
All right. When our country entered a new period marked by the launch of reform and opening up, Comrade Deng Xiaoping noted that experience of successes is invaluable, and so are the lessons learned from mistakes and setbacks. Principles and policies formulated on the basis of the experience gained and the lessons learned will unify all party members in thinking. The unity so formed is most reliable. In 1981, in its 6th plenary session, the 11th Party Central Committee adopted the resolution on certain questions in the history of our party since the founding of the PRC. The resolution reviewed the party's history in the period before the founding of the PRC and summarised the experience it had gained in the course of socialist revolution and construction. I mean, what he's talking
I'll take
about,
over now.
Yeah,
go.
What he's talking about here is kind of like the writing of the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. But anyway, carry on.
The resolution gave assessments of certain major events and important figures, particularly a correct appraisal of Comrade Mao Zedong and Mao Zedong thought. It drew a clear distinction between right and wrong and corrected the erroneous leftist and rightist viewpoints existing at the time. Through the resolution, the party came to a clear consensus and was more united than ever in support of a forward-looking approach. All this provided a strong impetus to the party's endeavours in reform, opening up, and socialist modernisation. 76 years have passed since the adoption of the party's first resolution on historical issues, and 40 years since the second. The past 4 decades have witnessed tremendous progress in the course of the party and the country, and tremendous advances for the party in theoretical and practical terms. We have now arrived at a new historic milestone. As we look back and set our sights on the future, we have both an objective need and the subjective conditions for a full review of our party's major achievements and historical experience over the past century, especially those in the 40 plus years of reform and opening up. The Central Committee considers it important in both a practical and historical sense to have a comprehensive review of the major achievements and historical experience of the party over the past century as we celebrate its centenary and the fulfilment of the first centenary goal of building a moderately prosperous society in all respects, and move on towards the secondary centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects. This review will help build a broader consensus and stronger unity in will and action among all members, and rally and lead the Chinese people of all ethnic groups in achieving new and great success in building socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era.
Right. Do we think that? I mean, there's something different, isn't there, in the since Xi Jinping took over, in the way that the Communist Party acts, speaks. Things like this prove that they are they're ahead of the West, and it also proves that they just don't care what the West says, right? You'll notice that speeches like this never talk about what the West is up to, right? It's always just about China's achievements in how China's managed to sustain China's existence in the world since they were bullied by imperialists, right? Pardon me. But what I think what this sort of shows is that this is you get a lot of socialists who will go, China's not socialist, right? Which is, fair enough. Some people might not be educated enough to understand it properly, and in a way, it's only basic socialist. So no, it's not socialist, because even China itself says that, right? It says it's basic socialism. So are we in that era now where the transition is happening in real time, right before our eyes? And it, what they always said would happen when the imperialists start to get weaker. We will be at a point where we're level with them, and then we'll overtake them. And once we've overtaken the imperialists, that's the time where we can switch to a more advanced stage of socialism and start to be a lot more internal in terms of bettering life for our own people, right? And at the same time, not only does you get people who accuse China of not doing enough in terms of geopolitics, in terms of internationalism, right? But the very fact that they exist breeds that, doesn't it? Because that's why we're seeing all the stuff that Sam is talking about. That's why when I'm saying they're not going to attack China in a war, they can't, because China has self-determined its own destiny to the point where the USA can't do anything, right? And speeches like this are, to me, this sounds like how Lenin and the Bolsheviks would talk about their own history at their own meetings, right? I know it's boring to sort of read through. I'll just try and skip through it and pull out some points, because at the minute, here's a bit. Look, we need to revisit the party's century-long history in which the party's advanced Marxism in the Chinese context, adapting the basic tenets of Marxism to China's realities and fine traditional culture, right? We must understand this to innovate the theories for the new era. So how can you complain about Chinese socialism? To me, if you say that China's not socialist, in saying that, it's already a little bit more socialist than it was when you actually said that a second ago. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's already out of date by the time you've said it. So if you don't think that China's socialist, cool, but just stick with them, right? And they will get there. I mean, they talk the talk. It looks like they walk the walk as well once you manage to shift the Western media out of the way. To me, anyway, that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I mean, this kind of thing is what the party's been speaking about, as she said in this speech, since its formation. Like in the 50s and 60s, Mao was talking about like the need for China to surpass Britain in steel production and developing the atomic bomb for defence purposes and things like that. It's just kind of expanding on that in order to kind of achieve that higher, as they call it, the second centenary goal of an advanced kind of prosperous socialist society.
And not only that, not only that, right? I mean, I think it's fine for a Westerner to have a criticism of China, right? In their own opinion, that's fine, because at the end of the day, it's just an opinion. It's harmless to the existence of China, isn't it? But I think the problem, well, not a problem. The thing about it is, for me, like I say, I see them being more and more wrong every day. You can say something and then it will get proved wrong. Maybe stuff you said about China, like for example, oh, it's just corrupt. Well, yeah, maybe under Zemin it was, but to me it looks like that's been cleared out now, and it looks like maybe it exists still. But yeah, sure. But it looks to me like when it does exist and examples of it come out to the public. I mean, you can only deal with corruption you know about, right? You can only fight crime that you know about. If you don't know about the crime happening, you can't fight it. So somebody can be corrupt and never get caught. You have to be found, don't they, to be caught. So, but to me, it looks like, I mean, just compare how Elon Musk talks on Twitter to Bernie Sanders when he's like, "Oh, I forgot you were even alive still, old man." Do you know what I mean? Compared to how he talks in China, because he wants access to that, you know, like you said a minute ago, 1.4 billion people in China, whatever. That area of the world is the most profitable, isn't it? It's got the most people there. So that difference, you've just got to see the bigger picture, I guess, and not be tricked by Western, oh, a dog's been killed by a bad worker stuff. You know, especially when you can find 10,000 more examples of it in the way. Go on, what were you going to say?
Yeah, like things like this speech and just how the party has various different kind of events each year to kind of cement this, I guess, democratic centralist process. Obviously, within China and within previous socialist projects such as the USSR and things like that, there have been corruption. Like, I think obviously in the 40s and the 30s, Stalin faced corruption within his party and dealt with it how he saw fit for that time. And I think China has done the same, and just things like this just show that this is kind of how the party is being guided, kind of based on this process, which has been, democratically built over the years, and kind of been leading the party since its formation. There might be certain aspects of China or people in China which may kind of think, there's some corruption, but things like this is kind of putting that to bed and saying it's kind of in hand. That's what I get out of it, at least.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, it says it here. Look, we need to revisit the party's century-long journey in the pursuit of happiness for the Chinese people, and rejuvenation for the Chinese nation. We must always bear in mind that the party and the people are inextricably connected and rise and fall together. It's only with such understanding that we party members can better devote ourselves to the benefit of people and rely on them in our endeavour for great accomplishments. Like, this speech is not only public for us to read in English, but it's been published in Chinese. Chinese people could watch this on TV. So how can anybody in the West? You could be the most ardent reader of the Daily Mail, right? And how could you suggest that, like, a people's political leaders speak like this publicly to them, but somehow they're brainwashed? I mean, it doesn't sound like that at all, does it? It sounds like complete opposite to me. It sounds like the politicians here are saying, look, without the support of you guys, we're nothing, right? And we rise and fall together. So if you want to join us in the pursuit of happiness, it's just ridiculous, isn't it, to suggest that that's some sort of hidden meaning behind this, which is to turn everybody into like whatever the Western media decides the CPC, the CCP, or whatever they want to call it, wants, and it's nefarious gain.
Exactly, and here, like, she is speaking to the Chinese people, like that's his audience. Whereas
the party and the people.
Yeah, the party and the people. Whereas in the UK, it's just like they're congregated in the parliament, and we don't really get thought about after 5 years. So.
Well, exactly. You've only got to look at Western. You can compare Western politics to this speech, and it makes China look good, without even, having to really understand China. You could remove any reference from China, right, and just be like, would you prefer this government, or would you prefer a government that lies to you about another country so they can go to war with it, steal all its oil, and use your sons and daughters, its own people's sons and daughters, to, murder other sons and daughters from that country they've illegally invaded? You would choose this, wouldn't you, every time? Yeah. There's a good Reddit thread on the economic system of North Korea, right? And it's like, would you want to live in a society where I'll try and get it up really quickly before we finish, because I can read it at the end of the show. Have you got anything you want to say on this while I try and find this?
I was just going to scroll down to the actual points we've just been in the introduction.
Go on.
I'll start with number one. So the resolutions on the party, major achievements and historical experience over the past century. So our party has already produced 2 resolutions on historical issues. These settle controversies on major issues in party history in the period from its founding to the early stage of reform and opening up, and their basic points and conclusions remain valid. So I think that's obviously in regards to the Cultural Revolution and things like that.
And also what they're saying there is shit happens, and we'll make sure we actually look into shit that's happening. Like when do the Democrats ever go, we'll make sure Bill Clinton wasn't lying? They just don't. Anyway, read through these. Just read the bullet points.
Yeah. So number 2 is, go on, Sammy.
No, you.
The resolution was highlighting the era of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and consider your turn.
Say that again.
Didn't you say that Harrison should read that?
Yeah, read it, Harrison.
Which one? Number 2?
Yeah, just read the point out because we'll get through.
Go. All right. Number 2. The resolution must highlight the new era of. Sammy just read that. God, what's going on here?
So that's the commit. That's them committing to the next stage of socialism, though. To me, that's what that sounds like. Next one. The resolution's appraisal of major events, significant meetings, and important figures must be consistent with the party's central committee's existing conclusions. Sure of that. Anyway, he's talk about how it's drafted. Blah blah blah. I mean, how transparent do you want this government to be?
I know.
You talk about China being nefarious, and you can go and read on how they're going to investigate their own history and policies to make sure that they, ticked all the boxes. And I mean, this is almost an add-on exercise, isn't it? Because they could concentrate on building China as it is, but they're going to look back on what they've done to make sure that what they do in the future, is even better than what they did before. If that's not dialectical materialist, I don't know what is.
Exactly. Here's a good paragraph. So, they all agree that the party has united and led the Chinese people in a continued endeavour to carry out revolution, construction and reform during all periods of its century-long history. That the party and the people have created miracles which will go down in the annals of the Chinese nation, world socialism and human society, and that the party and the people have fundamentally changed the course of the Chinese nation's history in modern times and written a brilliant chapter in the history of world socialism, adding new dimensions to Marxism. That the party and the people have scored indelible achievements toward national rejuvenation and made significant contributions to human progress, and that the party and the people have gained a wealth of invaluable experience on this great journey. And all of these things merit a systematic review, which is obviously what they're going on to.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Are you going to call China not internationalist and they're talking about world socialism? The president talks about their contribution to. Anyway, just before we end the show, I want to show this article because this is a good example of bias in the delivery of information. I'd like to present what I think is a good model of socialist planning for the period during the transformation of capitalism into communism. Whatever you want to call it, right? I know, don't get stuck on left-com arguments. Karl Marx didn't make the transformation from capitalism to communism. Being intended for the transformation period, the model has a role for the state, but I believe the main outlets of the model would work without the state. For socialist planning to meet the needs of the people, it must be participatory and democratic. The old capitalist management system cannot persist. Under the old bureaucratic system of management, workers lose interest in production and consider work a necessary evil, merely a means of earning a livelihood. Instead of managers shouting commands at workers in a bureaucratic manner, they need to go down to the lower units to help with them. There should be a spirit of cooperation between workshops. Individual management should be abolished and replaced by collective management in the form of the party factory committee. The welfare of the producers should take top priority, and every level of planning should involve the active participation of workers at the production level. Ways of solving questions affecting production and workers' activities, as well as methods of carrying out decisions, should be arrived at through collective discussion within the committee, aka democracy, whose members are elected by the factory's party members. Members of the factory committee should include a large percentage of, say, 60% of production workers, with the remainder representing a cross-section of all factory activities, including functionaries, manager, deputy managers, engineers, technicians, women league representatives, youth league members, trade union members, and office employees. Its composition thus gives it access to all socio-economic aspects of the enterprise and the lives of its workers. Furthermore, in large enterprises, there should be a committee in the neighbourhood where the factory personnel live. The committee should include the factory deputy manager and the heads of schools, kindergartens and nurseries. the director of the local hospital, the heads of central shops, etc. The committee is responsible for all aspects of the lives of the workers and their families: housing, fuel, deliveries of consumer goods, various services, education, health, laundry, dining halls, cinemas, houses of culture, etc. Mistakes and failings, minor everyday nuisances, which if left unattended might develop into real sources of resentment, may be solved on the spot by people who are well known to everybody. When the local organs of administration assume responsibility for any shortcomings, it is difficult to put blame on some distant and unknown body of administrators, and in the final analysis of the system of socialism itself, as has increasingly been the case in countries with extreme centralisation. If this model is implemented, the factory ceases to purely be a production unit in the restricted sense of the word. The factory has its own political and affiliated organisations, aka unions, blah blah blah, a workers' ownership, everything that we just spoke about above, and its own educational institutions, its own supply and social welfare systems. All major enterprises could also have a system of workers' militias to give workers as much power as possible. In terms of planning specifics, the planning process could begin at the factory level with mass meetings and discussions at workshops. The producers democratically arrive at decisions about the quantity and quality of what they can promise to produce given a certain availability of materials, technology and labour. I mean, this, when you read in theory, it's always easy, isn't it, to get stuck in the abstract of these ideas, but like what that means really is, like, instead of having some capitalist come onto the factory floor that day and be like, I mean, imagine an Amazon factory. Instead of having the managers be like, you guys have got like 3 seconds for every pickup and you have to do more pickups than the time you have for the day, you would have those workers in the morning being like, well, how many pickups do you feel like we can do today? Well, that's a reasonable number. Let's go. That's all it is. It's really, simple things. Anyway, where are we at? The producers democratically arrive at decisions about the quantity and quality of what they can promise to produce given a certain availability of materials, technology and labour. This preliminary decision is then conveyed upwards through local, regional, administrative bodies and state planning organs, where the plan is made coherent and consistent so supplies end up where they need to be. That's the central planning bit, possibly what you could call the state, I think we can all, even anarcho-communists and left communists, agree that the implementation of this model would be a laudable effort to be defended and worth fighting for, even if it's not ideal. Okay, I have a confession to make. I didn't make this up, and this isn't just a model, it's a system that actually exists today and has existed for over 50 years. It's called the Daeun work system, and that's in North Korea. And there you go. You can learn more about it here. I think that link's dead, but it just goes to marxist.org possibly. Everything I said above is from this book and is experts therein from speeches by Kim Il-sung. So there you go.
Nice.
But to me that sounds like that fits in perfectly with what China is doing, right? And having a world superpower that can do that is quite clearly enabling real battles to be won on the ground, right? In Yemen, all these things are connected in terms of how able they are to exist, right? Because if the empire was at its strength, it could just do what it's always done and commit genocide. It can't anymore, and that's because there are nations in the world that are going no. Whether you agree with Russia or not, Russia stopped the US from invading Syria, right? Whether you agree with the Syrian government,
play a massive part in that, yeah.
Whether you, it doesn't matter whether you agree with these governments or not. We're talking about the matter of fact, right? The Syrian government is for Syrians to decide, right? And in the same, and you will get liberals go, well, you're saying this against the people. Well, no, because we're talking about real mass movements like in Yemen, right? Or in Lebanon or wherever. Anyway, we're going to end the show there. Let's look at what Artsy's been doing all show, because it's looking spicy. Let's get this
It looks
moving.
amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
There we go. Has he got a silver AK-47?
Lovely.
It will be black, but yes.
Have you seen that? Have you seen that picture of the silver AK-47 that they get in the DPRK as like an award for some military game shooting competition? Have you seen
I
it?
haven't, but that sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to look that up.
I'll send a picture of it. It looks exactly like that. Just
Oh,
it's
that's
like
awesome.
a chrome or silver AK-47, and there's a picture of this DPRK soldier that's won it, and he looks like he's having the time of his life. Stood there,
That's awesome.
posing with it. Exactly. Yeah, that's looking awesome. Are you carrying on your stream, right?
Most likely, yeah. I'm gonna try to take a break and then come back and paint. So
Alright.
there will be a link on my Twitter at that time.
All right, cool.
Yep.
I'll retweet it. So if you want to go and watch Artsy continue it later on Twitch, then look out for that. What's your Twitter so people can follow you if they don't? I'm pretty sure
At
everybody does.
Artsy_Marxist.
Nice and simple.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice and simple.
Go follow. Anyway, yeah, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us again, and make sure you go watch that painting get finished. Harrison,
Thanks, Tom.
have you got anything you want to say just at the end before I go to these two goons?
Me?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I'm good. Yeah, I'm just, it was a great discussion, so really interesting to listen to. That speech by Shu is incredible, so
Nice.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
have
Well,
to listen
Harrison's
more
put a
of it.
link. Harrison's put a link in the chat to it. We'll
I
get
definitely
him to send
recommend
it.
reading that.
It's very long.
It's long, but yeah, it goes kind of into the intricate details of the different sections of Chinese history under the pie. So
If
really
you're
good.
going to read socialist text, you should be used to them being long by now, right?
True. Yeah,
Exactly.
in the grand scheme of things, it's not too bad then.
Yeah, exactly. It's a shorty. Sammy, what are you saying?
I was saying that it was a lovely episode, and I hope or at least find it useful.
Nice. We broke up a little bit there. Do your Yoda impression one more time for the people still listening.
Hope do I, everyone, find in this episode.
It's awesome. It's just like he's here. I don't know about everybody else, but Jesus Christ.
Oh.
Right. Keep quiet. I'm gonna let this music play out.
And I'll dip.
See you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
Are we off air?